Thank you very much, the management of the Group of Colleges, for having me here. And let me start by apologizing for getting late. We actually have one program which is already running in parallel, so I'm just coming from there and we'll have to rush back. So my apologies for that. I think on a different occasion, I'll probably like to spend more time, and I was just telling ma'am that we can even do we have these 2-day boot camps that we do for students, which is basic entrepreneurship and innovation and how to kind of look at an idea, how to do prototypes, pilots, how to convert an idea into a small business or a project. So we'll be very happy to do that. So let me start my talk. It will basically be a 15-minute kind of a presentation come talk. I think the topic of today is opportunities and challenges in e-commerce and digital marketing. So I'm going to start with that, but it's not an area of expertise. I'm not too much of an expert in e-commerce and digital marketing. Of course, I did a e-commerce startup back in 2000, 2001, which unfortunately was not very successful. But I'm more of an expert in working with startups, right, across the field. It could be e-commerce, it could be social enterprises, it could be all sorts of companies. So I'll just start by trying to understand really what e-commerce is and what digital marketing really is and what's the buzzword around it. मतलब ये सब चीजें इतनी ज़्यादा न्यूज़ में PR etc में क्यों आती है? So if you fundamentally look at it, e-commerce is nothing but the process of sales generation, order placement, product delivery and payment collection via the internet. Right? These are the 4 processes that you need to do in order to do any business. Right? You need to generate an order, you need to supply a product or a service to the customer, you need to collect payment, maybe you need to also have a service channel. So some of you who are from the MBA background would understand that these are the 4 or 5 typical channels which are required to do any business. Channel between the company and the consumer. So first of all, the consumer needs to know that this kind of a company or a product exists. This को communication channel कहते हैं. Right? So communication can be done via the internet. So that's basically the process of, let's say, digital marketing. A company or anyone who wants to sell a product to a consumer essentially tries to use the internet to discover that customer. Because of the simple fact कि आजकल हमारे पास मोबाइल पे, लैपटॉप्स पे इंटरनेट अवेलेबल है, and we are on the internet. So we are either on Facebook, we are on Google, we are on Amazon, etc. And through these, websites, a company can discover us. हम Facebook पे अगर एक particular kind of music like करते हैं, so a company which is trying to sell that sort of a music can discover us on Facebook and they can send us ads. Facebook पे जो ads आते हैं या Google पे जाएंगे तो साइड में जो Google ads आते हैं. So this is basically some organization which is trying to understand us based on our activity on the internet, what we like, what kind of content we read, and basically sending us a communication message that this is a new product which you might like. Right? Maybe 10-15 years back there would be other methods of doing it. You would have to typically use less pointed methods. मतलब जब आप newspaper में ad देते हो, it's something which is for everyone, right? So newspaper is not something which people read, of course, unless it's a very specific kind of a news medium. But typically a newspaper will be read by people across the sectors, across the segment. But something like on the internet, you can do more pointed advertising. Right? So broadly, that's what e-commerce and social media or internet marketing is, that it helps companies or anyone who wants to kind of communicate a product or a service to a customer, discover that customer well, more effectively. And which is also the reason why, we see a lot of startups, as the previous speaker was mentioning, that all of these companies, whether it's an Amazon or a Flipkart, were not there. I mean, maybe Amazon was there in the US, but they were not there in India 10 years back, right? But you had the Tatas and the Reliance and the Airtels, since numbers of years. So what is the reason why Tata did not set up Amazon? Right? I mean, Tata should have been the first, most probable kind of a company to have set up on Amazon or a Flipkart because they had the necessary resources. The reason for that is that because it's a completely new kind of a business, or it's a completely new kind of a business structure which emerges because of the internet being there. The consumer is behaving differently, the process of getting to a consumer is different, the process of supplying a product is different, but a Tata is structured in a different way. Tata can do businesses more effectively through retail. I mean, they can manufacture a truck and they can sell trucks to dealers. But if you tell them to do a similar thing quickly on the internet, they would not be able to do it. Therefore, it requires a startup to do it. Therefore, someone who is simply out of college, Albert Einstein, I'm sure you would know, had a term called a beginner's mind. Right? A student who is just out of college has a beginner's mind. So he looks at what the internet can do, he looks at what the consumer wants, he looks at what the supplier can provide, and he's able to come up with a new business model, which a Tata or one of these large companies cannot do because they don't have a beginner's mind. They have a certain way of looking at the world and a certain way of looking at a business. They have an organization structure which is structured to do a certain thing. Right? Which is the reason why most of these internet, digital marketing, e-commerce startups are done by people who are in their 20s, 21, 22, 25, something like that. It's not done by a 50-year-old CEO of a large company because he's not able to think afresh. Right? I'll skip some of these. So this is one slide that you might want to go, which is basically something which kind of showcases the point that I was trying to make, that there is a certain, so the industrial age mindset is more of a pre-commerce kind of a industrial structure, where you had large industries, manufacturing companies who were the big dominant players. But now we have the information age because of the internet. So industries are also morphing, industries are also transitioning. So a traditional taxi company is now Uber, or let's say a hotel. The Taj group of hotels, which was probably the dominant player, it still is, but maybe after 5 or 10 years, it will no longer be the dominant player, and you will have maybe an Airbnb or Make My Trip or whatever, one of these players who is able to more effectively reach out to consumers. Right? So I don't know how many of you know Airbnb. So what Airbnb does is, so what a Tata would do in terms of an Indian hotels company is that they would build hotels. They will take 5 years to build a hotel. They will first go to a city, do a market research, spend 6 months, यहाँ पे demand लगती है. Then they will try to acquire land, another 6 to 1 year to acquire the land, get approvals. Then they will appoint a project team. Then they will start building the project, another 3 years. Then they will have an operations team. So it's a 5-6 year project to sell a room. Ultimately, a hotel is basically selling rooms. Right? So what does Airbnb do? They go to a city. They figure out that there are these 10 or 15 homes, which could be homes of individual people, which are located in nice locations, which have 2 extra rooms. So maybe there's an old couple which is staying on the ground floor, but on the first floor there are 2 rooms where the children used to stay, and now the children are in the US. So they will help them do up these 2 rooms, and they will put the inventory of these 2 rooms on the internet. And within maybe 15 days they are online. They are able to sell a particular inventory, which would have otherwise taken a Tata 5 years, is now being able to, they are able to do it in 15 days. So that's the kind of disruption that internet enables. Right? There are a few other examples. I'll now quickly move to the more general startup domain. Right? So what exactly is a startup? There are a few definitions, you can go through it. But essentially there are 3 components of a startup. A startup business is not like any other business. As I just mentioned, it is something which is able to create a new innovative business model using some technology. It could be internet, it could be mobile, it could be what is known as IoT, Internet of Things nowadays. So the first thing is that it needs to be innovation. There needs to be an innovation in it. What we also sometimes call disruption. That a startup is able to disrupt the market. the example I gave of Airbnb. So a 5-year process is now compressed to a 15-day process. The cost is significantly reduced. The cost of building a hotel and then some financer coming in and giving a 15% loan on a 15% interest. Now there is no need for investment. The old couple basically makes some investment in those 2 rooms, and Airbnb is able to kind of aggregate maybe 50 such old couples, and they have 100 rooms. So they virtually have a 100-room inventory in a city ready, which would have taken 5 years for a Tata and loan and all those kind of things. Right? So that's the disruption. Right? The second thing about a startup is that it's scalable. जो Airbnb ने आगरा में किया, I'm just taking a hypothetical example. After 2 months they can do it in Jaipur, after 3 months they can do it in Udaipur, after 15 days they can do it in Jaipur, Jodhpur, Bikaner, right? They can quickly replicate the model. While a typical hotel model where you have to build a physical space, as I mentioned, the process is such that it's difficult to replicate. उसमें आपको पूरा 5 साल का 6 साल का जो प्रोसेस है वो करना पड़ेगा, तब जाके आगे बढ़ेंगे. So second is innovation. Third thing is the impact. That each of these startups has some sort of an impact. I mean, what we at Startup Voices, and I'll talk more about that, when we look at impact, we look at social impact. Now, Airbnb might not have too much of a social impact, but if you put some thought to it, you will immediately see that the impact that Airbnb has as opposed to the Taj group of hotels is significantly higher. Because it increases the income of 50 couples who have given 2 rooms each. Right? In the Taj group of hotels, it's only some employees who get employed and they earn a 20-25,000 rupees salary. So the impact of a Taj group of hotels is significantly higher. Similarly, most startups, the way we define it at least, we also look at impact, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, or people who are living, who are not very rich, let's say the middle class, low middle class, and down further. So let's say if you were to do an Airbnb kind of a model in a small city, maybe a village in Bikaner, which is a very picturesque village with a haveli, and there are 5 havelis, and you tie up with these 5 havelis, the social impact will be pretty high. So these are the 3 definitions that we look at in a new business, which we call as a startup. Right? I am going to skip some of these. The other key important feature of a startup, I just spent 1 minute on this, is that startup को build करने का जो process है, वो जैसा कि इस diagram में लग रहा है, ये process iterative है. It's a circular kind of a process. It's not a linear process. If you have to build a hotel, physical hotel, it's a linear process. There are 100 steps involved. Take land, approval, license, appoint project management organization, give them a budget, sign MOU, right? If you have to do an Airbnb kind of a thing in the small village around Bikaner, you will first have to do a prototype. So there is no process. You will have some sort of a checklist on your mobile. Why I am saying on your mobile? Because that checklist will also change. So it's an iterative process, right? Like Indian classical music. The person who goes to sing on the stage when he is singing an Indian classical raga is iterating. As opposed to, let's say, Western classical music, they go with a sheet of music which has the entire process and the entire set of notes. This diagram is essentially trying to showcase that when you do a startup, which is a very innovative thing, it's not there, you go to the village close to Bikaner, when you go and meet people, the first thing that they think is, you are probably out of your mind, what are you trying to do? This is not the way it happens. The only way to sell rooms is that you build a building and you have a brand and you have a person with a tie sitting. That's the way a hotel runs. So you will basically spend maybe 15 days speaking to people, then you will realize that there is one guy, one person who has a haveli, who is kind of figuring out what you're trying to say. You will spend maybe another week with him, and then you will do some sort of an MOU with him. Yeah, चलो एक बार try करके देखते हैं. देखते होता क्या है? कितना होगा? What is the cost? You just have to do one room. उसमें आपको 10,000 रुपए लगाने हैं, एक बेड लगाने हैं, ये लगाने हैं, और मैं आपकी जो ये इन्वेंट्री है इसको इंटरनेट पे डाल दूंगा, और जयपुर से जो कस्टमर आएंगे उनको 2 दिन के लिए यहाँ कराने हैं. देखते हैं क्या होता है. That's what is called as a prototype. So this is what this diagram is basically trying to showcase, what is known as a minimum viable product. So you have to first do a prototype, then you basically do an experiment, then you validate it, invalidate it, and that's the way you kind of go ahead. So it's a series of experiments that is required to build a startup. While if you have to do a regular sort of a company, it's a more linear process. Right? I mean, this is basically what it's trying to showcase. So the first is more of a linear, large company building process. The second one is how you build a startup, step by step. I mean, one quick slide on funding of startups. So typically startups get funded through equity. A venture capital investor would come and kind of fund a startup. These are the 3 or 4 things which are required for a startup to get funded. Right? As I mentioned, the startup first needs to be innovative. It needs to be solving a big problem. It needs to have some customer traction and validation, which means that it has done a couple of prototyping. It's basically done these, maybe sold 5 or 10 rooms in the village close to BICON. It has been able to figure out some sort of a model that, I'm going to charge 100,000 rupees, I'm going to take a 200 rupee margin, and that's how I do the business. And it's got a team. There are 3 or 4 people who are able to look at the various aspects of the business. So there is one person who's looking at technology, one person who's looking at business side of it, and so on. Right? I guess I don't have to kind of go too much into detail, so I just had a few quotes from, and you can basically go to the internet and check this. So there is this website called www.paulgraham.com. So this person is one of the founders of this organization called BICON, which works a lot with startups in Silicon Valley. So these are some of his own experiences of working with startups. Right? So let's say I'm just going to read a couple of them. The way to get startup ideas is not to try and think of startup ideas. Right? It is to look for problems, preferably problems you have yourselves. Right? So the way to kind of come up with a startup is to look at a problem and then try to figure out how to solve that problem. Right? The very best startup ideas tend to have 3 things in common. They are something the founders themselves want, that they themselves can build, and that few others realize are worth doing. So on and so forth. So these are some of the key learnings of trying to build an internet or a technology-based startup. I'll kind of wind up my talk with something about Startup Oasis, the organization where I work. So we are an incubation center. We work with startups, we work with students, help them kind of do things which are innovative, do things which are something more than merely doing a job. We have been supported by RECO and CIIT initiatives that I am Ahmedabad. We have a 16,000 square feet space in Sitapura where around 100 or so people are based. About 25-30 startups are based there. So basically these are people who are building their product from our infrastructure. We have essentially supported around close to 85 startups over the last 3 years. Around 17 of our startups have raised funding from external investors. These are the kind of programs that we do. So in a certain sense, you can look at Startup Oasis as a school for startups. So just like this is a college, we are a college for those people who want to do startups. So we have these programs. The way you have an MBA program, engineering, etc. We have these 6 programs which are for people who want to start up. So the early stage is for for students, or let's say someone who wants to just start just as an idea and now wants to go ahead. Similarly, there is a program for those people who have a prototype and now want to go ahead. So on and so forth. So you can go to our website startupoasis.in and get more information. I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much.